I have a small but growing Warhammer 40k army, but I have a problem. I made a deal with my buddy to meet up at the end of March to play a game, but not with a small army. I need 2,000 points of these sci-fi pirates, and I'm far from it. But there is hope though. There's actually quite a bit of time between now and then, and for once in my life, I did the adult thing of creating a modest schedule between January 27th, this Monday, and the end of March that, if I stick to, will result in me having a finished 2,000 point Dark Eldar force. Over the next 7 weeks, you'll see how long it takes me to finish my Dark Eldar army. I'll time each stage so you get a better idea about how long it takes me to finish this stuff. There are so many great videos on the internet of people painting armies super fast, but that is not realistic for the average hobbyist. I want to show you a more realistic and achievable approach to painting your army. So let's get started. It is January 27th, day 1 of week 1 of the Get the Dark Eldar Army Done project. I got an 80s thrash metal playlist that's about 7 hours long, and I'm also gonna tackle the thing that I'm least looking forward to tackling, and that is all of these Raiders and Ravagers. Let's get after it. I guess one reason that I'm not looking forward to assembling all these Raiders and Ravagers is because it's not just a vehicle, it's also a crew of like 4 or 5 dudes. So if my plan is to paint up 4 Ravagers, I'm essentially painting 2 whole units of Cavalite Warriors as well. Now I know I don't have to add these dudes to my vehicles, but I kind of feel like it fills out the ship in a really nice way and makes them look awesome, so I kind of want to. Sadly, we didn't get very far on day 1, probably because of the late start, but it's Tuesday now and it's 8 a.m., so let's see how much I can actually get done in a full day of work. I got my morning soda and I'm ready to rock. One thing I often think about when assembling a Games Workshop kit is what to do with all these extra greaves. The hobbyist in me wants to load this ship up as much as possible and make it look as detailed and cool as possible, but also every single thing you add to the model adds on to the paint job time. And if you multiply that across 5 of these gunboats, it starts to really add up. If I were hobbying just like I wanted to hobby right now, I would do one of these vehicles at a time and make each one special, not just with the modeling, but also with the paint job. But I can't ignore the fact that approaching the hobby with a deadline and painting multiple things at a time does yield amazing results. And I often struggle to balance these two things, the person who wants to be done with a project, but the person who also wants all their stuff to be unique and cool. Some of my army, like my Razorwing jet fighter, is big and impressive and cool. And the other parts of it are cool, but just less so, and that's okay. And being done and also being somewhat unique is best, as opposed to being done and not being proud of any of it, or being proud of some of it and not being done. Even though I've been in this hobby for over 20 years and have assembled hundreds of models, I still make mistakes as well, like forgetting to put in this rudder before clamping together these 2 halves of the ship. Whoops. Luckily I caught it before the glue set up too much. As I'm sure you guys have heard from a lot of other content creators, assembly takes a long time. So I'm actually super thankful that I've already assembled 3 of these ships a while ago. But there's always some weirdness that occurs when dealing with your past hobby self, like the choices you made for a color scheme, or in this case, assembly. For some reason, this chain detail is the exact same on all 3 of these ships, but other details like the flags and where they're placed and trophy spears are different. Why did I do that? I have no idea. How often are you guys confused by your past self's hobby decisions? I was assembling the gunners for my Ravagers when I realized that I like a certain type of Dark Eldar head, specifically the one that comes with the Reavers. I feel like it works really well with the kind of scheme that I'm going for. It kind of reminds me of Sardaukar from Dune that looks super cool, and I want more of them, but I don't want to pay GW for them. So I'm gonna print them out, and I found 2 different varieties that I'm gonna give a shot right now. While printing out these heads, I also printed out a bunch of desert flora to use for basing later on. By the way, if you're curious about what resin I'm using for my 3D printing nowadays, it's Amerilab's TGM7. I'm still testing it out, and it's definitely more of a premium brand, but supposedly it's supposed to blend nice detail retention and also flexibility. You can definitely see here that it's quite flexible. Other resins that I've used in the past would have easily snapped by now. Okay, now that my 3D printing side mission is finally complete, I can get back to assembling this single Ravager that I haven't finished yet. Oh, Now, one thing that I struggle with a lot in life is just staying focused, and that matters a lot, especially when you're talking about a long project like painting a whole Warhammer 40k army. If I have a schedule that requires me to be progressing every single week at a consistent rate, I need to make sure that I stay on top of it. And one way I do that is by avoiding areas of my office that are just distractions. For instance, if I sit down at my computer, 3 hours might go by and I might not even notice it. Because of that, I actually check my email before I go into the office on my phone, so I have no reason to go to my computer right away in the morning. This way, I can come in and just sit down and start assembling right away. Okay, step 1 complete. All of the vehicles are assembled. We have 4 Raiders, 1 Ravager, and I'm a bit embarrassed to admit it, but it took me 14.5 hours to assemble both of these boats, all of their crew, which is 10 people, and also do a bunch of 3D printing of heads and also basing details. To prep these models for paint, I'm gonna take all of the crew members that are similar and attach them to their own handle, which is gonna be made out of hardboard or the back of a picture frame. As someone who is inexperienced with army painting, this is one of those things that I'm not sure has real value. But the thinking goes something like this. I can save on mental energy and also time if every single model that's identical is in my hand while I'm painting any given step. There's no putting a model down and picking the next one up, trying to find the right one. I know for a fact I have all of the drivers in my hand while I'm painting. For anyone who's watching this video who's painted a lot of armies, is this a step that you actually do? Or do you not bother with it? I'm curious. For a while now, I've questioned the need for priming on plastic models. On a car or something that's getting beat up constantly, it makes sense, but for the most part, miniatures are handled with great care and don't need that extra bit of paint adhesion, and it's gonna save me a lot of time. I know this part of the video is gonna fly by in like 15 seconds, but every single step takes forever. I've refilled my airbrush like 5 times and I'm like only a little over halfway through base coating all of these dudes. Mini painting takes time, and you know, that is okay. Please enjoy this footage of me base coating while not stressing about how long it takes, and also a brief ad from this video's sponsor. Magic Spoon is a nutritious, nostalgic cereal or treat to fuel your hobby sessions. The first treat I grabbed when they sent me the box of goodies was the blueberry muffin flavored treat because it reminded me of the copious amounts of sugary mini muffins I ate for breakfast as a 10-year-old. Speaking of nutrition, each serving of the cereal has 13 to 14 grams of protein, 0 sugar, and 4 to 5 grams of net carbs, which is great. Now I can relive the late 90s, but without the bulletproof health that I had as a kid.
I even have slippers on.
Similar to the cereal, the treats they have are also health conscious, coming in at 11 to 12 grams of protein, 1 gram of sugar, and 1 to 2 grams of net carbs per bar. My wife is currently on a calorie deficit diet, and it's hard to think of and make low-calorie food to eat all the time. So one of these bars or a bowl of cereal will perfectly fill those gaps. Something that I love about Magic Spoon is that they're so confident in their product that it's backed by a 100% happiness guarantee online. If you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund you your money, no questions asked. Use the code Miniac or click on the link in the description to try Magic Spoon cereal or treats today and get $5 off. You can also find Magic Spoon on Amazon or in your nearest grocery store. Back to progressing on my Warhammer 40k army. All right, it's Thursday, and this would normally be the day of the week that I would need to stop painting and start making the video. 2 days to make a video is about the right amount of time. But because I'm so committed to finishing this Dark Eldar army on time, I actually hired an editor for all of these Dark Eldar videos. So I can just hobby for a straight week, get them the footage, start hobbying for another week, give them the footage, and then hopefully while I'm hobbying, they're making the video. Just because I really want to have as much time as possible. Speaking of, it's 7 a.m., I got here early, let's crank out these base coats. Pretty early on, I realized that it would be smart of me to base coat other parts of this massive vehicle with the airbrush where I can. Black is a big part of my scheme, and so is silver, and silver does good with a black base coat, so it makes sense to bust out the black now to paint things like the big rudder on the back, the underside of the ship, the shock power on the front, and heck, even the big dark lance that's hanging out in the front. I can airbrush a large amount of that without needing to hit the ship. It's also a better idea for me to do this before I fully finish the khaki stuff. One huge lesson that I learned about airbrushing while doing the Razor Wing jet fighter is that it's smarter to do the smaller parts first, because if you want to mask them off, there's less masking to do. I prematurely started to mask some of the parts of the ship that were going to be silver that were only black. But then in my head, I was like, wait, I might want to airbrush these silver. So I should just airbrush them silver now and do whatever I can that's going to require an airbrush, and then mask them off and then do the white armor. So that's the plan now. At some point, I just need to commit to a decision and just do it. Oh my gosh, bruh. That's me. When it comes to airbrushing, order of operations is really important. With the silver base coats done, I can finally start progressing on some actual painting. I grabbed a teal ink and started to apply it as some shading, and then realized that this wasn't exactly the color that I wanted. So I grabbed a blue ink, added some black to it, and then proceeded with shading. One thing that's tricky about airbrushing on top of a super glossy surface, like most metallic paints, is you have to go kind of slow. If you go too fast and flood the surface, the ink starts to bead up on whatever you're painting. And for a big vehicle like this with lots of flat surfaces, that could happen pretty easily. I want to go fast to get done as much as possible, but also at the same time, some things just require you to go a little bit more gradually and slowly, like ink on a glossy surface. With the blue ink shading done, I also did some dry brushing with silver, which again is another messier technique that'd be good to get done now to bring out some of those awesome hard edges on the engines and the shock prow in the front. With the dry brushing complete, that was the last stage of the silver for now, and now I can mask them off with a combination of tape for certain harder edges and masking putty for more amorphous and harder to cover things, and then I can get on to doing the black. While using the masking putty specifically, it's really easy to push it into the cracks and crevices you need to with the sculpting tool. I did that mostly around the engines because those are kind of awkwardly shaped. With the masking all complete, we can begin with some simple black base coats, which is going to account for the sails, but also some of the panels on the ship. Once everything was base coated black, I could begin highlighting, and I did that by taking some white ink and mixing it into the same black paint I used to base coat. Initially, I begin with a pretty dark gray, targeting my highlights toward the bottom of the armor panels that are flaring out. While painting the sails, I'm simply trying to get a bright gray highlight in the middle of the sail, in between the beams. I then follow that up with another highlight, just mixing in more white ink. And each time I create a highlight, I mix more and more thinner into it. This allows me to lower my PSI, get closer to the miniature, but also apply a more diluted layer of paint. I don't want to overshoot it too much, but if we do, there's a plan B. And that plan B is the last step, which is a shade of pure black ink. Black ink is nice because it's glossy, and because of that glossiness, it's going to show up even darker than our typical matte and satin paints. Here's a tip for getting in tight places with an airbrush. When painting the back black panels, there's a little narrow area that I wanted there to be a progression from black to gray on. Because I don't care about overspray on the top side right now, I'm aiming my airbrush high. You can actually see black paint depositing above the panel that I care about. Because the airbrush shoots paint in a cone, if I aim high, the bottom of that cone will tag that little thin, narrow area where I want it to go. While airbrushing the sails, I get this effect for free. If I simply aim at the beam and have a steady hand and go back and forth along the beam, I'll deposit a nice, fuzzy little shadow right next to that beam, leaving the middle of the sail nice and gray. And with the completion of that step, that brings Thursday to an end. One more day. Coming back Friday morning revealed that the masking putty had kind of dripped off of the model. Luckily, it seems like for the most part, everything is still covered that I need to be covered. But this is a weird / negative feature of this stuff. It's Friday, the last day of this week, and another early morning, so we need our sustenance. Let's get after it, bud. Because masking is such a significant part of this project, I figure it's probably good to go over some best practices when it comes to applying tape specifically. One, starting with a great brand is helpful. The Tamiya masking tape, in my experience, has been really good. Two, it's never a bad idea to weaken the stickiness of the tape by first attaching the tape to your pants, your apron, your cutting mat, and then taking it up and applying it to the model. Third, you kind of want to use as big a piece of tape as possible. Dealing with a bunch of little fiddly pieces of tape has a bunch of problems. One, in this case, if there are multiple layers of tape over a panel line, it's hard to actually see the panel line and where to cut. Two, if you're cutting a bunch of tiny little pieces of tape, there's a good chance that they'll come off of the part you want them to stick on. And that leads me to my last point. You want to tape over the line by a decent amount because when you cut it off, you want a nice large piece to rip off. I'm in the middle of taping all these Raiders up and I'm on my third one, and something just happened that has never happened before while using this masking tape. I pulled the paint off of the extra part and it took a ton of paint with it. And I know what you're thinking immediately. You're like,
you didn't prime it.
And that's not actually the case. This is one of the older guys that I did prime, strangely. I can tell because it has the painted base and because some of the paint that I pulled off had maroon under it, which is a color that I used a lot. The question for me now is, do I continue taping this stuff up? Do I take all the tape off and proceed with a different strategy? Because holy cow, if this just takes a bunch of black paint off, I am
kind of screwed.
I think I'm in too deep. I think I just need to continue for now. I hope this turns out. I hope this would be so sad if this just rips off like a ton of black paint. Unfortunately, with this model, I can't totally follow these best practices, especially around all these spikes. So to deal with them, I fashioned a circle cutter by taking a piece of hollow brass pipe and chucking it up in my Dremel and filing a sharp tip on the end. And then using that cutter to cut tiny little holes in pieces of tape that I could then loop over those horns and then tape around when necessary. This wasn't a totally bulletproof idea, but it was better than what I was doing. Okay, taping all done. It did take a while, but now hopefully the airbrushing on the khaki will go a lot better and a lot smoother, but I have my doubts. I did check some of the other areas of the Raiders and they were looking okay, but on one of them, the tape came off of the black part and it took a massive chunk of paint with it again. And again, this was one of the older Raiders that has been sitting painted for well over 2, maybe even 3 years. So I don't know why the paint isn't bonding to the surface, even though I'm like weakening the tape and everything. I'm just gonna forge ahead, but I'm concerned. Before doing more khaki base coats, I had to pin some guys into their little hardboard base because they were kind of standing awkwardly and didn't stick nicely with just poster tack. With the khaki all nicely re-base coated, we can finally start to actually apply some highlights, and I'll do that with a yellowy bone white color. This vehicle has big sweeping curves, which is really satisfying to airbrush. And the way that I do that is by first targeting the bottom edge that flares out the most and getting a pretty nice opaque color along that edge. And then I back the airbrush further away from the vehicle and kind of fan it out and apply a nice little dusting of that same color in between that darker line and my original base coat. I'm not applying this highlight to the inside of the vehicle just because that's less important. I also do the same thing to the passengers in these vehicles as well. With that highlight done, I can do my final highlight, which is just pure white ink. And again, it's the same thing, but I'm just being a little bit tighter this time, closer to the edge, more extreme. With the highlights done, I can do one layer of shading, and let me hand it off to Live Scott to give you a quick tip. While airbrushing something like a Raider that has a lot of hard edges, you can get some pretty hard lines with the airbrush depending on how you angle the brush and the model. If I want to add some shading to this railing right here, all I got to do is hold my model such that that top edge that I want to stay nice and white is totally away from my airbrush. So if I just do a little bit of this action, I can go super heavy with this dark color even, and if I flip it up, that top edge is still totally white. And this happens all over the edge of this Raider, so it's super easy to get nice, soft transitions with a nice, harsh railing highlight right there. Don't forget about how you hold the model and where you point the airbrush. You don't even need to mask a lot of stuff if you know how to do this pretty well. It's worth mentioning that I didn't shade the normal guys. I would normally if they were guys that are infantry in my army, but I figure I can skip this step for the passengers in these vehicles to save some time. Unlike with the highlights, also with this sepia ink, I'm going to apply a little bit of shading to the inside of the vehicle just to give it a little bit of interest.
Okay, it is do or die. The airbrushing on the white is all done, which means that the major components of all of these vehicles are now airbrushed, and it's time to remove the masking tape. Okay, let's start with the ones that have less of a chance of having a problem, the ones that I assembled and didn't prime. Let's do it together. Oh my gosh. Starting out good. Okay, got all the masking stuff off, and it was a pretty big success. No paint got pulled up. A couple of edges that I need to clean up, but that is totally normal. These are looking a little haggard right here, but again, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna sink a wash in there, and I'm also gonna add chipping to these edges and edge highlights, so it doesn't matter. This was pretty awesome. It looks freaking great, even though it's like not even halfway done being painted, but it just looks nice with this two-tone black and white. Heck yeah, okay. On to the scary one. So far, so good. No! Oh, first casualty. See that maroon paint right there? I know what that is. No! Ugh. All right, that's pretty awful. I think it's only gonna get worse on the mast, but let's pull the Band-Aid off. Okay, somehow we came away unscathed on one side of the banner, thankfully. Okay, the entire banner is okay, amazingly. Now the back half. No!
Despite the absolute carnage of removing tape from the black parts, the silver lining here is that removing the masking putty was actually really straightforward. It kind of all popped off as one giant chunk.
Look, I would be lying if I told you I wasn't extremely frustrated by this outcome.
We should first discuss why this is happening in the first place. When I first painted my Drakari army, I did it with a maroon color because that was going to be my shadow. And I used a paint that another YouTuber recommended, a range of paint called Molotov 1 for All. This paint was touted as being a great primer and color all in one. And clearly it's not up to the task in this situation. So I'm never gonna use this paint ever again, and maybe I recommend that you don't either.
It's 2 p.m. on Friday, and I have a couple other things that I have to do before I leave the office, so I think I'm gonna leave this here for now. This is a full week's worth of hobbying on 4 Raiders and 1 Ravager, including all of their crew, which includes 20 dudes. This is what I got done. I understand that a lot of you are probably going to give me crap in the comment section for being slow or trying too hard or whatever it may be. But here's the thing. I understand a lot of the modern methods used for painting models fast, and I don't like what those models look like. And more importantly, I don't enjoy the process of painting that way. You know, if it wasn't for the paint chipping, I'd be pretty happy with how much progress I made here. We got the major base tones down on 5 of these vehicles and the crew, and I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. A lot of details left to paint, don't get me wrong. But these are the major parts done, except for the paint chipping. My biggest lesson learned in doing this is that this video should have been me painting 1 of these vehicles. And in that process, I would have discovered all the things I should and should not have done. If you ever plan to paint a lot of models all at the same time, really, truly, seriously, just paint 1 of them, figure out all the intricacies of that 1 model, and then go for the batch paint. Even though I have my colors figured out and my scheme figured out, there are still things that I learned on this particular model that I haven't painted yet. It's not all doom and gloom though. I can definitely fix this problem, and you're gonna wanna tune in next week to see me finish up these 5 vehicles and all their crew. If you like this channel and you wanna support it, there are a number of ways in which you can do that. If you're feeling bad for me, I'll take your pity money. A great way to support the channel is through Patreon. You get access to my Discord, you get access to early release videos, all sorts of awesome stuff. You can also pick up a lot of my merch and also some of my hobby products on my web store, like my cutting mat or my brush coffin that holds brushes and other similar shaped tools. You can also pick up anything that I used in this video in the description below. Those are affiliate linked products, and if you purchase using those links, I get a little extra kickback at no extra cost to you. Subscribe today! And most importantly, don't forget to... my minis!